Good morning and welcome to Truck Weight Analysis, configuring trucks to comply with state regulations. Truck Science partnered with NTEA in 2019 to provide members with the next level solution for calculating axle weights. So we extend a special welcome to NTEA members joining us this morning. My name is Sorcha O'Grady and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Truck Science. So why are we here? Compliance with US Federal Interstate and State road regulations, as well as provincial regulations in Canada, is essential when configuring trucks. It's important to bear in mind what the regulations are for your jurisdiction, but also for other jurisdictions if the vehicle will be operated in more than one state or province, or if you are hoping to sell your trucks further afield, or indeed are already doing so. This webinar will cover how to configure efficient trucks that comply with regulations in one or many jurisdictions of your choice. It will include a live demo of the Truck Science axle weight calculator using a Class 8 vehicle. Of course, compliance with road regulations is not our only concern. We need to comply with OEM ratings, including GVWR or gross vehicle weight rating, gross axle weight ratings, etc. We need to ensure that axle weight distribution supports steering and braking ability, for example, by ensuring that a significant portion of the total weight is carried on the front axle. We usually have a goal of maximizing payload capacity. We want to right-size the truck, both to reduce capital cost and fuel consumption. And we want to avoid undue maintenance or rework, or indeed invalidating the vehicle warranty. We need to be mindful of rollover stability by keeping the center of gravity as low as possible. And turning radius becomes important. For example, a garbage truck that will need to turn in a residential area. There are lots of other considerations too, including site infrastructure, driver needs, and internal standards stipulated by your organization. I'm sure a few of you could add many more bubbles to this slide. But in general, these are some of the things we need to bear in mind when we're laying out a vehicle. However, the focus of today's webinar is regulations and the impact that those have on payload capacity. This webinar will examine how a truck fares across various states and provinces and some of the peculiarities between states and how they do or do not apply bridge law. It will include, as I said, a demo of the axle weight calculator. Lots of you attending this webinar have been using Truck Science for years. I see lots of familiar faces, or rather names, popping up here as you were joining. Some of you, of course, are seeing it for the first time today. So the pace may be a little fast for some or a little slow for others. But don't worry, you will not be expected to remember any of the details of today's presentation, and you'll be glad to hear that there is no test at the end. Should you wish to have a personal session with me or one of our team next week to walk through an example that's relevant to what you do in your company, we'd gladly set that up for you. As I said, we'll share the recording, and with the wonders of YouTube, you can slow it down or speed it up as you watch it back. So we're going to jump straight into a live demo now. You may want to, for fun, jot down how much payload you think you can get on that vehicle. I'm just going to switch to my app screen here so I can share that with you. Okay, so for the live demo, I'm going to take a 6x4 dump truck and examine how it fares across US states and Canadian provinces. So firstly, I'll open a vehicle, a Kenworth T880 6x4 chassis, and I'm just going to take this one here. So if this is the first time you're seeing the interface, you just might want to take a moment to have a glance around. Got inputs that go on the left. There's a compliance dashboard here. If you keep an eye on that to make sure you're compliant with both manufacturer ratings and regulations. There's a detailed weight summary below. I'll get to that later. You've got various views over here on the right. I'm just going to set up my vehicle first so it's ready for what I want to do with it. So I'm going to amend the wheelbase just by clicking on that wheelbase dimension. 208. Also going to shorten this overhang at the back. 29 inches. And I'm going to open the vehicle menu on the left-hand side to review the axle weight ratings. So I'm going to just increase these weight ratings. Because our focus here is regulations, we don't want the manufacturer ratings to limit what we can do. So I'm going to increase these to the maximums this vehicle would typically go to. I'm going to give it a rating of 23,000 on the front axle. And I'm going to increase that tire width also to 17.5 inches. Again, as I said, as I'm jumping around here, I'm obviously very familiar with the interface. If you're not, just try to get a general sense of what's going on, but don't worry if you don't catch anything. We could always go through it with you another time. The gross axle weight rating for the rear, then I'm going to increase to 46,000. And the total gross vehicle weight rating to 80,000 pounds. So as you'd expect, this vehicle still complies with manufacturer ratings and the regulations applied. If I click into regulatory compliance, I can see that the current set of regulations that this is being compared to are the Federal Common Size and Weight Regulations. So I'll add a body. From the left, I configure my vehicle first, then body, equipment, followed by payload. So I'm going to go to the body, choose a dump truck. And from my team library, I'm going to choose this 16-foot heavy-duty dump body. So if you just glance below the drawing and take note of this weight summary, or we call it the weights table, you can see that there's distribution of weight by axle. So you've got a front and rear columns, and then also the total. If you start from the top and come down, you've got itemized chassis weights, fuel and crew weights, the body weight. Indeed, if you had equipment, those items would be itemized there too. And these are all added to get a total unladen weight here of 21,525 pounds. The total unladen is the weight before payload is added. We skip a couple of lines, go to permissible. Permissible is the maximum permitted on each axle based on the lesser of the manufacturer ratings and the selected regulations. So for instance, this 51,000 total limit is the lesser of the 80,000 GVWR that I specified earlier, and the Bridger regulation limit of 51,000, leaving a permissible total of 51,000, which is going to limit what we can do here. So we cannot simply subtract the total unladen from the permissible total to come up with the payload capacity, because one of the axles may reach its limit before the gross vehicle weight rating or the total bridge limit. The maximum payload is automatically calculated and then added to the unladen weight to get the gross weights on each axle and the total. In this case, the gross weight on the front axle with a payload of 28,629 pounds highlighted here in blue is 16,154. Gross weight on the rear is 34,000 and total gross weight is about 50,154. The two bottom rows in this table are here for your information. They're basically two ways of representing the same information. When the gross weight is compared with the permissible weight, it is expressed as a percentage in utilization. So 16,000 as a percentage of 20,000 is 80%. 34 as a percentage of 34,000 is obviously 100%. So in this case, the limiting factor, or the permissible that is limiting the payload to 28,629, despite there being unused capacity here of 846 pounds of the total vehicle capacity, the payload is being limited by the rear axle group, the tandem axle. In other words, tandem has reached its limit before the GVWR or the total bridge limit. So if I increase the cab gap, I will obviously be putting even more weight onto that tandem. Going to increase the cab gap to 5 inches, and you should see the payload drop ever so slightly. Payload is now sitting at 27,621. So a difference of 5 inches in the placement of the body has dropped our payload by about £1,000. Before we switch to New York State road regulations, I'd just like to point out the permissibles here. If you take a note of them, got 20,000 on the front, 34,000 on the rear, and 51,000 total. So let's apply the regulations for New York State. Go to regulations applied here, and clear those and add in New York State. So you'll see straight away that our permissibles have changed. We've new limits to work with. We've got 22,400 on the front, 36,000 on the rear, and 54,000 total. These are all higher than what we had on federal regulations. New York does not have the US federal bridge formula applied, so the maximum weight allowed on the tandem is £36,000. Maximum payload now rises by about £2,000, or 3,000 actually, from 2,500 to £30,079, highlighted in blue again. So we can achieve over 30,000 payload on New York State roads without a pusher axle. Let's see what happens when we add a pusher axle. Go to the vehicle menu, weights and axles. I'm going to add this pusher. And the payload has increased by another £2,000 to 32,193. Of course, the gain that the pusher gave us is partly offset by the weight of the pusher itself. So you might ask yourself, is it worth adding a pusher axle in this scenario? I guess only you can answer that. The utilization highlighted in blue here at 100% identifies the limiting factor. So in this case now, 100% utilization of the regulation limit for the triaxle group, and we've also got 99.5% on the total bridge. So you could argue that this is a well-balanced vehicle. We're using all of the capacity of the triaxle and almost all of the capacity of the vehicle. At 55,500, that total is coming from the New York State regulations. Let's see how the same truck fares on state roads in Delaware. Again, I'll just go to my settings, remove New York, add Delaware. Sorry. Payload figure highlighted in blue on the right-hand side has jumped by a very significant £10,000. So there's a difference in this with this setup between New York State roads and Delaware State roads of £10,000. We're now on 42,725. The limiting factor is now the two rear axles. Axles 3 to 4 are on 100%. To get even more payload on there, we can try moving more weight onto the pusher axle. So if I click on the pusher permissible here in the weights table, I'm going to increase the GAWR, the gross axle weight rating, to £18,000. And I'm also going to specify the percentage of the total rear axle group weight that should be carried by this pusher axle to be 30%. And now you see we got yet another £5,000. We're up to 47,329. Those of you who are already familiar with the program will notice that the bridge view has disappeared here from the right-hand side, and that is because there is no bridge law on Delaware state roads. Let's take the truck across the border to Pennsylvania. 2 state roads there too. And now our payload is at £50,255. So payload has risen from, we had about 27,000 to now over £50,000. You have noticed that the permissible for the rear axles 3 to 4 has changed from 34,000 to 42,800 since we've moved to Pennsylvania. And the limiting factor is the total permissible of £73,280, which is the regulation limit on Pennsylvania state roads for any vehicle. Let's take a look at an East Coast state that's a little bit different. So clear Pennsylvania, Georgia. Georgia has some grandfathered rules, but not others. And we're looking at Georgia interstate regulations. These rules apply everywhere. So the total permissible weight is comparatively low at £51,000 now. If you follow my mouse, we're in the third row from the bottom in the total column, £51,000. So we're back down quite drastically to £27,975 of payload, which is very similar to what we were getting on the federal interstate rules. There are higher axle limits though, over 40,000 here on rear axles 3 to 4, that permissible. If I click into it, you can see that that's coming from our regulations, 40,680. The issue here is that Georgia doesn't recognize auxiliary axles, so the pusher axle does not have any impact on the overall gross weight. Maybe the regulations were written before there were lifting axles. So it makes sense anyway to remove this pusher in Georgia because it's only adding to the weight of the vehicle and not gaining any extra weight from the regulations. So as I add that axle or remove that axle, you see the payload rises back up to 29,000 because I'm gaining the weight of the axle itself. And now we're getting a little more than we would under federal law. Now let's take the truck out west. We're going to go to Idaho next. Sorry, I clicked that a couple of times too many. You can see here in the permissible row for axles 2 to 3 or the tandem axle, we've got a limit now of 37,800. Indeed, any group of axles with a total distance under 13 feet will have that limit. We've got a payload of 32,291. We can try adding the pusher back now that we're out of Georgia. We go to vehicle, weights and axles, and pusher. And that's a little bit disappointing. We are down to 27,438 pounds of payload. So the pusher axle doesn't give us a higher limit on the tridem axle group. It's still 37,800 on axles 2 to 4, as you can see here in the weights table. And that axles 2 to 4 are the limiting factor. They're at 100% utilization. So I mentioned that we have different views on the right here. You'll see the bridge icon is back in the second icon there. Bridge is back because we're in Idaho now and the bridge applies. But yeah, let's switch to the bridge view to examine the axle spread. So if you look at axle spacing here on the left, you can see that the distance between axles 2 to 4 is 101 inches. We want to go to 13 feet on that axle spread to take advantage of the higher limits in Idaho. So we need to find that axle 2 to 3 dimension. We're going to go to vehicle, dimensions, length, axles 2 to 3. And I'm going to increase that to 97 inches. Now, if you look at the axle spacing, again, underneath the drawing, you've got axles 2 to 4, and their rounded distance is indeed 13 feet. So the permissible for the tridem group increases now from 37,800. Let me just get the weights table again. From axle 2 to 4, from 37,800 to 56,470. And the payload has increased from around 25,000 to 36 or almost 37,000. 36,872 pounds there. But we're not maxing out the overall capacity of the vehicle. You can see that there's an unused capacity in the total column, second row from the bottom, of 5,553 pounds. So we can try increasing the wheelbase and maybe opting for a longer body. I'm going to click on the wheelbase dimension here and increase it from 208 to 241 inches. And I'm going to replace the body with a longer one. So I'll just cut that one right off. And this time I'm going to add a 19.5 foot body. Give it the same distance from the cab, 5 inches. And see our payload now is at 41,012 pounds. So let's see what happens when we move that first pusher axle back and add a second one. So I'm going to first reduce this axle 2 to 3 spacing from 97 back down to 48 inches. And you can see that the limiting factor is the rear axle group there. I'll add a second pusher axle. And the limiting factor is still the quad axle group. If we go to the bridge view again, if we check the axle spacing here from axle 2 to 5, we have a rounded distance from axle 2 to axle 5. Indeed, you can see it highlighted under the drawing there. It's just short of 12.5 foot. So we need to get that up to 13 feet when rounded up. So I'm going to change the tandem spread. From 53.1 inches, that's axle 4 to 5. I'm going to increase it by not even an inch to 54 inches. Now you can see we've got our desired spacing on axle 2 to 5 of 13 feet. And the payload, as you can see, highlighted on the drawing here, has increased to 42,323, which is another 2,000 pounds of payload. And we are limited now by the overall bridge of Idaho. That is the 67,250 pounds. As you can see in the total row, the utilization is at 100% of the total capacity of this vehicle. And by total capacity, I mean permissible, and that is the lesser of the manufacturer rating and the bridge limit for Idaho. And so in some states, you don't get more by adding more axles. It comes down to the overall distance between the front and rear axles. In other states, adding axles is the key. So it's just very important to know where you are or where this vehicle, more importantly, is going to be operated. Let's take this same truck across the border into Washington State. We're nearly there. Total bridge limit. So if we look at the permissible row again, in the total column has fallen now from 67,250 down to 61,500. And the permissible for the pusher axles, if you see pusher 2 and pusher 3, has also dropped from 13,000 to 11,600. That is not limiting our payload because the payload is being limited by that total limit. But in Washington, you've got 500 pounds per inch of tire width on 2 tire axles. So that's what's limiting our payload to our pusher axle capacity to 11,600. If I just look at the tires on that pusher, I can see they're 11.6 inches in width. So that's what's limiting that. If I, for instance, change those tires to 15 inches, you'll see now I'm up at 13,000, which was the limit, the GAWR of that axle. We had increased that to 18,000 previously. So now we're getting the 15,000 from the width of our tires. Okay, so we're down to 36,573 pounds of payload now. We can maybe just take a couple of more examples. I'm going to try this one in Minnesota. We go on state roads in Minnesota. I didn't unselect the previous ones. And there's no change at all to the payload here because, again, federal bridge laws are applied. Let's try locking the payload. As we've been working through these examples, the payload has been automatically recalculated based on what the current limits are. But I'm going to lock it at 36,000 now for a moment. And I'm going to add regulations for Iowa. So if this vehicle is operating between Iowa and Minnesota, we can add Iowa, but we leave Minnesota regulations also on. You can verify your calculations against up to 5 sets of regulations at once.
Nice, Sorcha. I just have a question here from a participant. It's about what is kind of a safe level for having a utilization. And I was mentioning that in the chat that we can also set up organizational standards to kind of help people guard against going too far or too close to that 100% mark.
Okay, I'll just show you how to do that in just a moment. Okay. And is that the only question, Paul, you want me to cover?
Yeah, so far that's the only question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I keep clicking this button twice, so that's why I'm seeing that error message. I had just locked the payload to what we could achieve in Minnesota before also adding the Iowa regulations. So you see we have a problem now. Our regulatory compliance is shown up with a red X. And if I click into that, I can see that this combination is still legal in Minnesota, but there is an issue in Iowa. And you'll see we're on 107% utilization based on the Iowa limits now. So there obviously are lots of scenarios where vehicles can be legal in one place and not in another, and that's something you can examine. If I just unlock the payload again quickly, we'll get the maximum payload that's achievable for both Minnesota and Iowa, and that's obviously being constrained by Iowa. So we're back down to 32,000. Okay, we can move to Canada for just one example in a moment, but before I do that, I'm just going to just add that organization standard that Paul spoke about. So I have my little setting cog here, indeed I can find it up the top. So we've already been playing around a lot with the regulations. We can add favorite measurements. For instance, we can add utilization. And there are a few different ways to express this. A vehicle gross as a percentage of the GVWR, I think, is probably, well, let's add both of these. The gross vehicle weight as a percentage of the GVWR being the gross vehicle weight rating that Kenworth has rated this vehicle at. And then you can also do the gross vehicle weight as a percentage of the permissible. And the permissible is just the lesser of the GVWR and the regulation limit. But we can add both of those favorite measurements. So I'm just going to add those first so you can see what happens with those. So now we've got utilization. If you just look to the bottom left of this dashboard on the left-hand side, we've got the vehicle gross weight as a percentage of the GVWR. So we're at 72% of what Kenworth says this vehicle can carry, although we're at 100% of what we're permitted to carry, and that's based on the regulations in Minnesota and Iowa. So I guess in answer to your question, you may not want to be maxing the vehicle out at 100%, but you're probably happier to max the regulation limits out. But anyway, that information is there, and you can do what, as you please with it. The other thing that Paul mentioned now was organization standards. So we talk about 3 pillars of compliance. Manufacturer ratings, we obviously have to comply with those. Bridge or regulation limits for the jurisdiction the vehicle will operate in. And then the third area that you can kind of set up compliance indicators for is your own company's rules of thumb or, best practice. So I'll just show you where you can add those now. If you see this organized, this is all in your settings dashboard, organization standards. Sorry, I just wanted to highlight that one heading there, organization standards. And I don't have any of these switched on at the moment, but I'm going to add one now for utilization. So if I just scroll to the bottom or near it, and I'll find vehicle gross as a percentage of permissible. And this is, we can say, I'm not sure why I can't see the other one, as a percentage of the GVWR there. I'll check that. Oh, because I already have it here. Okay, so I can say I'm happy for the vehicle gross as a percentage of the permissible to be between 0 and 100%, for instance, but I would like the vehicle gross as a percentage of the GVWR or the vehicle's rating to be between, say, for instance, 60 and 90. So, I don't want to spec a vehicle which is being totally underused. I also don't want to spec a vehicle that's being used to its limits. So I can switch the 2 of these on now by just ticking those. Like I can keep them configured, but switch them on and off as I please. And then, so I'm just going to OK those. So we've got 0 to 100 on the permissible and 60 to 90 on the GVWR. And now if I just go back to my dashboard, I can see that I've got, I'm complying with the manufacturer ratings, I'm complying with regulatory compliance, and I'm complying with organization standards. If, for instance, I override this payload, just going to override it very significantly, you can see that I'm breaking everything now. I'm breaking the manufacturer ratings, or what Kenworth said the vehicle could carry. I'm breaking the rules of the road, and I'm breaking my own organization standards. So you'll see if I come down a little bit with my payload to 50,000, the manufacturer ratings I am complying with the manufacturer ratings, but I'm breaking the rules of the road and my own in-house rules. I'll try just coming down 40 and see if I can find a, yeah, no, I'm still not there. 38,000. I was hoping I'd quickly get to a place where I have 2 out of the 3 ticked, but I'm not getting there fast anyway. No. 34, nearly there. No, it's not working for me. I can't fool it. Okay, so 32,573. Let's just see if I 32,800. No, okay. I've set the organization standards to be very close to what the regulations were allowing me anyway. But hopefully you get the picture. You can kind of set up your own in-house checks so that you are not, you know, while you might be compliant, you have your own kind of best practices about how you deal with these limits. I hope that answers your question. I'll move. Yeah, Paul, have you got another question?
Yeah, I do have I have an interesting one about CNG weight analysis, and I figure if you're still looking at the US, then we could even take a look and see what impact changing to a natural gas powered vehicle has on that weight, especially on the US common regulations.
Okay, so I'll just switch to common regulations quickly. And would you like me to switch the energy source?
Yeah, if you switch the energy source to the to compressed natural gas, then you can see the impact that'll have. So I'm not sure if everybody noticed, but I did see that that you are getting that exemption of 2,000 pounds on the bridge law in the US with like a natural gas or battery electric vehicle. So that exemption is in that regulations there. The question was specifically about a cab over chassis that like one that Mountain Motors might have, but the energy source will govern what that getting that U.S. federal exemption.
And so in that case, the total permissible increased from 61,500 to 63,500. Is that right, Paul?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. You get an extra 2,000 pounds.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on?
No, I think you can go ahead and I'll get to them.
Okay, I'm just going to switch it back to diesel so everything is predictable for me here. Okay, so we're going to just quickly try this one in Canada. I'll remove those federal regulations and I'm going to just choose Ontario. I'm also just going to switch the measurement system to metric. The program is a little bit slowed down by me sharing my screen, so I just have to be patient with this. Metric. Okay, so this brings up a few I suppose notable things on the screen here. The first one is that this is new. This is something new we've started here, is to add tips that pop up in the bottom left, tips pertaining to your particular configuration in the jurisdiction that it is currently in. So for instance, this one just points out that only one pusher axle is allowed in Ontario on a truck with a 6x4 axle layout. So we're going to have to remove that second pusher. I'll do now. And that removes that warning, but we're left with a couple more. So the first one, or the tip rather, is that the vehicle is being checked as a truck 3 designation. And if you'd like to comply with truck 5, it's just showing you how to do that. We'll just stay with truck 3 for now. And then one more tip here: to qualify for load equalization, adjust the percentage of the rear axle group weight carried by the pusher to about 25%. So we saw how to do that earlier. If I click on the pusher axle, the percentage of the rear axle group weight carried on the pusher is currently set to 22%. We can increase that to 25%. And so that tip goes away. So we've kind of fixed that one. That obviously reduces pavement damage if the load is more evenly spread across the axles. We still have a problem though. Ontario regulations are being flagged here with the red X. And if you look at the drawing itself, you'll see that there's a red dimension here, 12, 19 spacing between axle 2 and 3. We've also got some notes and warnings over here on the right, and you'll see there are 21 notes and warnings which have accumulated as we've gone. I haven't been drawing your attention to those, but if I open it now and go to warnings, you'll see that the distance from the liftable axle to the rear driven axles does not meet the legal minimum of 2,300 millimeters. So if I change this to 2,300, which is the minimum, our Ontario regulations are now getting a green tick. The dimension on the drawing is behaving as expected. And now we've got a nice dump truck for Ontario. So I suppose the last step then, what we would normally do when we've got this far is to just print a report. Just going to generate a report here for sign off. And that's kind of the end of our work here. I think, Paul, have you any more questions before I just flick back to my presentation briefly?
Yeah, I had a interesting question about that, whether we have heavy haul regulations in the state of Missouri, and those specifically, there's these heavy haul zones in and around various places in Missouri, and we don't actually have those specific regulations yet. But I mentioned that we are able to add those on an ongoing basis as we come across ones that more of our customers request. And then I had another question about just opening and saving calculations. About once we have everything configured really nicely, then if we can save it, and so just we can save and open the calculation there in a list inside the app.
Okay, and just to maybe expand on that, so I can save a PDF document, which is a read-only view of my calculation. I can save a live calculation, which I can share by email with anyone I'm collaborating with. They don't necessarily have to be users of Truck Science. They're offered a free trial to open a calculation and move things around if you want to get somebody else's advice on it. And then you can also import drawings of, say, bodies or equipment and save those to your own library too. So you can save the printouts, you can save the calculations themselves, and you can save the components of the calculations. Anything else, Paul?
There's also a question about checking kind of how you discussed saving only 5 states or opening the calculation with 5 regulations applied, and if there's a way to check against all of them. And what I suggest there is that to think about using those U.S. common size and weight regulations or the Canadian MOU regulations, because those really should be. They are the kind of lowest common denominator in both countries, and so you should be able to operate your vehicle with those regulations across the entire country. However, that being said, there always are exceptions, and like you discussed, the state of Georgia, that is an exception that isn't very well known, and it applies on the interstate as well. So it really is to kind of like know where the truck is going to be operating, and drill down into those interstate regulations on a state-by-state basis.
Okay, so again, we've just run into a problem with the MOU here, but I'll remove the pusher.
Yeah, that's in the MOU regulations, there's no pusher axle specified, and so so the app won't return any values there and only in Ontario you can have a pusher axle on that vehicle.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Anything else before I move on?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm just going to pop very quickly back to my presentation. Will be interesting to know who guessed the payload correctly on this. You know, I guess as we traveled from New York to Delaware, all the way through Minnesota, Iowa, up to Ontario, we just saw the maximum payload fluctuates quite wildly, between say 27,500 pounds right up to over 50,000 pounds. So can we ever really say how much a truck can carry without first asking where it is going to operate? I know that we've covered quite a lot in a short time. If you'd like to set up a personalized demo for yourself or colleagues who weren't here today, I'm more than happy to do that for you, and you can just grab a time on my calendar there. If you'd like to find out more about truck science, you can take a look at our website. And indeed on the truck science page on the NTA website, our own website, on our website you'll find lots of videos, previously recorded webinars, short explainer videos of 2 or 3 minutes, and lots more. And here are the next 3 shows that I believe we will be attending or exhibiting at rather. We'll be at the usual spot at NTA's Work Truck Week in Indy in March, and very much look forward to that and meeting lots of you there. We'll be attending the NAFA Institute and Expo for the first time in Texas in April in San Antonio, and we'll be back at the Waste Expo in Las Vegas in May. If you're not already using Truck Science, please feel free to take a free trial from our website, truckscience.com. NTA members who add their membership details will have their trial automatically extended from 7 to 30 days. So you can take a month's trial if you're an NTA member. You'll also qualify for a discount on checkout if you're an NTA member. That's the $50 discount. I'm conscious of time here. I did include a slide on pricing in case anyone wanted to kind of get a quick look at that. Basically, this question normally comes up. What I've shown you there is really all available in the professional edition, and that comes in at $600 for the first user or per year, $400 for additional users. So that's all for today. I know we're running ever so slightly. I think we're 3 or 4 minutes over time, but I valued your questions and thanks for raising them. Again, if you haven't had enough time today, just get in touch. I'm going to end the webinar now. Before you go, if you could rate the webinar, leave any comments or questions. If you want to receive a quote or anything, just indicate how many users you think you'll need. But yeah, thanks for joining us. It's been a pleasure as always. I'm going to end the webinar now, so thank you and goodbye.